The Democratic Alliance says it will head to court and challenge Parliament's failure to find a suitable venue after a fire gutted the National Assembly in January of this year. Members of Parliament have been forced to hold hybrid meetings as the current Good Hope chamber can only accommodate 120 people. Let's tell you more about this. We're joined by Siviwe Gwarube, DA Chief Whip. Siviwe, thank you very much for availing yourself this afternoon. Perhaps let's start with reaction, if you'll allow us, please. We saw you at the handing over ceremony by the independent panel on the Phala Farm saga, which is something that the Speaker of the National Assembly, Nosiviwe Gwarube, has characterized as an indicative milestone in South Africa's constitutional democracy.
Yeah, and good afternoon to you and good afternoon to your viewers. Yes, this morning the independent panel report that was the panel chaired by the former Chief Justice Sandile Ngcobo was handed over to Parliament, in effect handed over to the Speaker, and it will be made public later on this evening when the ATC, which is the usual notices, the announcements work in Parliament. And so we're looking forward to receiving that report because, of course, you know that we have been really pursuing the answers that I think will probably be contained in the report. The former Chief Justice indicated that the report is in 3 volumes, the actual findings of the panel, and that there's also a record of decision, which is really welcome because we want to be able to trust in the process. We want to be able to be satisfied that, in fact, the panel has exercised its mind, has used the rules that are available to them, and has used the information that was available to them to arrive at the decision. So we're looking forward to seeing what that decision is, whether or not there will be grounds for impeachment proceedings against the president, or whether or not the panel has found that it doesn't have any grounds. In the event that they find no grounds to institute impeachment proceedings, I think it's quite important to state up front that if that is the case, that does not in any way, I think, indicate that there is nothing, and that it just simply means that the panel would have looked at the information before them and not have been able to find sufficient evidence to make such a recommendation. And so I think it's very important that we know that, regardless of what the panel says, that there's a lot to be answered for here, and that's why the DA has been resolute in asking for an ad hoc committee to be established so that we don't just look at the president's complicity, but we also look at cabinet ministers who were involved in this cover-up, state institutions that would have known, and the entire network. We would wish to see what went wrong so that this can never happen again.
No doubt we'll have plenty to speak about once that report is made public later tonight. On to the business of our invitation for today. Just remind our viewers how Parliament has been conducting its business and how this has impacted members of Parliament since the fire in January.
Look, I think since the fire, one of the things we had initially, the fire has gutted 2 of the chambers in Parliament. So the new Assembly and the old Assembly, which were integral to the work of Parliament. So that's where sittings used to happen. That's where also committees, a lot of committees used to conduct their business. And so with the gutting of the fire, essentially half the precinct is inaccessible to members of Parliament. Only 120 MPs can gather in the Good Hope chamber, and the majority of the committee meetings that are conducted online. And it's our contention to do that. Yes, of course, a stopgap measure had to be implemented during the time when the fire took place and, following that time. But it has been 10 months, almost to the day since Parliament burnt down. And the fact that in 11 months later, Parliament is yet to find a semi-permanent setting for Parliament is a problem. Not just because we want members of Parliament to come to Parliament for vanity purposes, but because the Constitution is quite clear. There are sections of the Constitution which state that the work of Parliament must be accessible to the public. The work of Parliament is intricately involved with what the public is an intimate stakeholder to the work of Parliament. And the mere fact that now members of the public are not allowed on the Parliament precinct, that has never been the case since 1994, where members of the public are not allowed in the precinct. They can only follow parliamentary sittings on YouTube, which in our view is exclusionary to many South Africans who would otherwise wish to have access to the work. So this is more, in our view, a constitutional problem where we are not meeting our constitutional obligations as the institution to bring on board South Africans whose work it is that we are busy with here. And that's why we are now wanting to serve Parliament with our lawyer's letter to say that they've got now it's been almost a year since Parliament burnt down, and that an alternative venue for Parliament must be found. Because we know that it's going to take 4 years to rebuild, 2 billion rand later. And so we can't have a situation where Parliament is just continuing like this.
Sure. To your point of engineers advising that it's going to take some 4 years for rebuilding to be done, you're also accusing the powers that be of refusing to find an alternative venue. How so?
Look, I mean, we've been very involved with the process that Parliament was following up until a certain point where we realized that there seems to be almost an acceptance that this is how the business of Parliament is going to be conducted until Parliament is rebuilt again. In fact, last week when we had our joint programming committee with the NCOP, I actually posed the question to the chairperson of the NCOP as to this item on our agenda continues to say it's ongoing, finding alternative venues. So this has been a priority of Parliament up until a certain point. We understood that we needed alternative venues for Parliament to conduct its business. It is now strange that somehow along the way, a quiet decision, not by members of Parliament, a decision was made somewhere that we are no longer in the search of alternative venues for Parliament. And that for us is a problem because, as I said, we are going to run into constitutional problems. And I think this because there's a misconception, Dudu, that Parliament belongs to politicians. It does not. It belongs to members of the public. It belongs to South Africans. And so the work that we do here has to be accessible to the people out there.
So essentially, Siviwe, what I'm hearing is that the party is not loath to wait for the 4-year process as per engineering or engineers' advice. You're just seeking an alternative venue so the business of Parliament can continue and the everyday South African can be part of that.
Absolutely. I mean, look, it would be difficult for us to say, no, it can take quicker because, of course, we're not the experts on the matter. We're pleased that Treasury has set aside 2 billion rand for the rebuilding of the institution. That's good, and that the work must be done. And we will be monitoring that very closely because we don't want a cent of that money going to waste on corruption, being stolen, or going missing. So we're going to be looking at that process. But at the same time, Treasury also allocated 118 million rand to Parliament for its work, considering that it doesn't have a permanent home. And our view is that Parliament can get into public-private partnership agreements where we can get reduced rates at venues that will be suitable for the institution. But we can't go on for 4 years essentially pretending and behaving like, if 120 people are here, then the work of Parliament is ongoing. If anyone has watched the proceedings of the House, you'll realize the challenges with load shedding, people getting disconnected, ministers not coming to the House, just simply relying on being on Zoom. It's not how Parliament is ought to operate. And so we are saying that 11 months later, surely much work should have been done by now.
Siviwe Gwarube is the Democratic Alliance Chief Whip. Thank you very much for availing yourself this afternoon.